The autumn rain pelted against the windows of the Springfield Police Department on October 15, 2022, as Chief Warren Watson stood before a sea of reporters. The gathered media packed the small briefing room, their cameras creating a constellation of red recording lights in the dimly lit space. The air was thick with tension and the musty smell of wet coats. Chief Watson, a 30-year veteran of law enforcement, had handled countless press conferences, but none like this. His weathered face bore the weight of betrayal as he gripped the podium with white-knuckled hands. The local access television camera zoomed in on his face as he cleared his throat, about to shatter the illusion of safety in their small Vermont community. At approximately 6 a.m. this morning, following a joint operation with the FBI, the Springfield Police Department arrested one of our own officers. He paused, steeling himself. Officer Thaddeus Reeves, a 7-year veteran of this department, has been charged with multiple counts of sexual assault, extortion, and abuse of power. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and notebooks flipped open with a fury. In the back of the room, Sergeant Diane Kendrick, a 20-year veteran, watched her chief with tears in her eyes. She had supervised Reeves's field training when he first joined the force. The small Vermont town of Springfield, population 12,437, had seen its share of crimes over the years. Burglaries, domestic disputes, the occasional drug bust. But this was different. This was a betrayal from within, a cancer that had grown undetected in their ranks. Chief Watson raised his hands for silence. Over a period of 8 months, Officer Reeves allegedly used routine traffic stops to target at least 11 women. He would fabricate violations, then threaten them with criminal charges unless they submitted to his demands. The investigation suggests there may be more victims who haven't yet come forward. The Springfield Gazette's young reporter, Ezra Sullivan, typed frantically on his laptop. By morning, his headline would run, "Trust Betrayed, Officer Arrested in Sexual Assault Scheme." Within hours, the story would spread beyond Vermont's borders, reaching national news desks and igniting fierce debates about police accountability on social media. Local resident forums exploded with activity. Some shared their own unsettling encounters with the disgraced officer, the lingering gazes, the unnecessarily long traffic stops, the way he would stand too close during interactions. Others defended him, unable to reconcile the charges with the officer who had helped search for their lost children or assisted with flat tires on cold winter nights. As Chief Watson fielded questions from the press, he couldn't shake the image of Reeves's empty desk in the squad room. The officer's badge and service weapon, already logged into evidence, had left bare spots on the worn desktop. A half-empty coffee mug still sat beside his computer monitor, the contents now cold and stagnant, like the trust that had curdled in their community. Outside the station, Officer Luna Rosewood watched the rain pour down, her own badge feeling heavier than usual. She had worked alongside Reeves for years, shared meals with him in the break room, responded to calls together. How had nobody noticed? The signs were there, subtle but present, like shadows at dusk. Now, in hindsight, they seemed to scream their warnings. Thad Reeves's roots stretched back to the quiet town of Hanover, New Hampshire. Born to Clarence Reeves, owner of Reeves & Sons Hardware, and Eleanor Reeves, a high school librarian, Thad grew up in a modest colonial-style house on Maple Street. His childhood bedroom window overlooked the hardware store, where he spent countless hours organizing nuts and bolts, learning the value of methodical precision that would later serve him in unexpected ways. Former classmates from Hanover High's class of 2011 described him as a ghost in their memories. Present, but unremarkable. Yearbook photos showed a lean teenager with carefully combed hair and a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. His senior yearbook quote, "Service above self," would later be scrutinized by criminal psychologists for early signs of his manipulative nature. Yearbook advisor Beatrice Whitman remembered Reeves as unusually interested in the school's security cameras, often volunteering to monitor the surveillance feed during his free periods. At the time, it seemed like helpful initiative from a conscientious student. Years later, she would wonder if this was his first taste of surveillance power. After graduation, while his peers headed to college, Reeves enrolled in the police academy. His application essay spoke passionately about protecting the vulnerable, words that would turn bitter with irony. At the academy, he distinguished himself not through leadership or physical prowess, but through his encyclopedic knowledge of traffic laws and regulations. Training officer Salvatore Ricci noted Reeves's particular interest in traffic stop procedures. He asked more questions about driver discretion and probable cause than any cadet I've trained, Ritchie would later testify. He wanted to know exactly where the legal lines were drawn. Reeves graduated third in his class of 32, his academic excellence overshadowing his middling scores and community engagement. The Springfield Police Department hired him immediately in 2015. The small force was understaffed, and Reeves's impressive academy records promised a solid addition to their ranks. His early performance reviews painted a picture of competence tinged with isolation. Fellow officers described him as reliable, but distant, always volunteering for solo patrols rather than partnered assignments. Marriage to his high school sweetheart, Adelaide Winston, in 2017, seemed to signal a period of stability. They purchased a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Springfield, and Adelaide took a job at the local credit union. But beneath the veneer of small-town contentment, cracks were forming. Adelaide's spending habits, primarily online shopping for luxury items, clashed with Reeves's gambling addiction. He had discovered online poker during late-night patrol breaks, and the thrill of risk soon consumed his off-duty hours. Their joint bank account became a battleground of secret withdrawals and bounced checks. Their arguments echoed through the thin walls of their starter home. Neighbors reported hearing heated exchanges about money, trust, and control. Adelaide later revealed that Reeves had installed cameras throughout their house, claiming they were for security. She discovered he watched the footage obsessively, tracking her movements when he worked nights. By early 2022, their marriage existed only on paper. Adelaide slept in the guest room, and Reeves spent his free time in the basement, where he had set up multiple monitors connected to his surveillance system. When budget cuts hit the department that spring, forcing overtime reductions, Reeves volunteered for the graveyard shift traffic patrol that nobody wanted. Lieutenant Pascal saw it as dedication, an officer willing to sacrifice his personal life for the department's needs. The reality was darker. Reeves had found his perfect hunting ground: dark roads, vulnerable victims, and minimal oversight. His personality underwent subtle shifts. The quiet, methodical officer developed an edge of authority that made female colleagues increasingly uncomfortable. Officer Rosewood noticed him lingering in the parking lot after shifts, watching female dispatchers walk to their cars. When questioned, he claimed he was ensuring their safety. The financial pressures mounted. Adelaide's credit cards maxed out while Reeves' online gambling debts grew. Their joint savings disappeared into a black hole of interest payments and lost bets. The power he held during traffic stops became his escape, a way to regain control over a life spiraling into chaos. The night of March 15, 2022, brought an unseasonable warmth to Springfield. Thaddeus Reeves sat in his patrol car near the intersection of Route 27 and Pine Street, his radar gun aimed at passing vehicles. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:43 p.m. when he spotted the silver Honda Civic. The car was doing 38 in a 35 zone, barely a violation, the kind most officers would ignore. But something about the driver caught Reeves's attention. Through the rear window, he could see she was alone. His dash camera recorded the initial pursuit, though later investigation would reveal suspicious gaps in the footage. Amara Delgado had just finished her shift at the Copper Kettle, a diner on the outskirts of town. At 24, she was rebuilding her life after fleeing an abusive relationship in Phoenix. Springfield represented a fresh start, small enough to feel safe, big enough to disappear in. She had been in town just 3 weeks. As the patrol car's lights flashed behind her, Amara pulled over, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her Arizona driver's license. The window hummed down, letting in the mild spring air and the approaching footsteps of Officer Reeves. His flashlight beam swept across her face, lingering longer than necessary. Reeves noted her delicate features, the name tag still pinned to her waitress uniform, the slight accent in her voice as she asked what she had done wrong. His training kicked in automatically. He requested her license and registration, watching her hands shake as she fumbled through her glove compartment. The Arizona license triggered something in him. Out-of-state plates, a young woman alone, no local connections. The possibilities unfolded in his mind like a roadmap. He returned to his patrol car, running her information through the system. Clean record, no warrants, no local address yet. When he returned to her window, his demeanor had shifted subtly. He claimed to smell marijuana, though none was present. Amara's protest grew increasingly desperate as he ordered her out of the vehicle. The dashcam would later show her standing in front of his patrol car's headlights, arms wrapped around herself against the night air. There were no other cars on Route 27. The nearest house was half a mile away, its lights long dark. Reeves explained that he could arrest her, have her car impounded. The words drug corridor and intent to distribute hung in the air like poison. But then he paused, suggesting they might be able to work something out. 23 minutes later, Amara sat alone in her car, tears streaming down her face. Her uniform was askew, her name tag missing. She would sit there for another hour before finding the strength to drive home. In her rearview mirror, Reeves's patrol car lingered until she pulled away. The next morning, Reeves submitted his daily report. It showed a routine traffic stop, a verbal warning issued. In the department's break room, he declined breakfast with fellow officers, preferring to review his dash camera footage alone. He edited the video carefully, creating gaps that could be explained by equipment malfunction. That afternoon, he requested permanent assignment to night shift traffic patrol. Lieutenant Pascal approved the request without hesitation. Few officers volunteered for those lonely hours. Reeves's personnel file noted the change with a single line of text, unremarkable among thousands of administrative decisions. At home, Adelaide noticed something different about her husband. He seemed energized, more confident. When she asked about his shift, he spoke vaguely about feeling useful, about maintaining order. That night, he added a new folder to his computer: traffic stops, personal records. Amara Delgado called in sick to work the next day. She spent hours researching how to file a police complaint, but every pathway seemed to lead back to the same department where Reeves worked. Who would believe her word against a respected officer? The thought of facing him again, of having to recount the details, made her physically ill. A week later, she quit her job at the Copper Kettle and found work at a diner in the next town over. She changed her route home, avoiding Route 27 entirely. In her apartment, she installed additional locks and kept her curtains permanently drawn. For Reeves, the incident became a template, a prototype for future encounters. He had discovered a hunting ground where his badge gave him all the power he needed. The rush of control lingered with him, more intoxicating than any gambling win. Between April and November 2022, Thaddeus Reeves transformed from opportunistic predator to calculated hunter. His methods evolved with each encounter, becoming more sophisticated, more controlled. He developed a system for selecting victims and covering his tracks that would later shock even veteran investigators. His patrol car became a mobile command center. Behind the standard police laptop, he installed a second device that tracked traffic cameras and security systems along his route. He learned their blind spots, the dark pockets where surveillance couldn't reach. A hidden compartment under his seat contained a burner phone, recording equipment, and a notebook filled with detailed information about his victims. The pattern emerged slowly. Jasmine Torres, a 22-year-old nursing student, was stopped at 1:15 a.m. on April 3rd. Reeves claimed her taillight was out, though footage from a gas station she'd visited minutes earlier showed both lights functioning perfectly. When she attempted to show him a video on her phone proving the light worked, he threatened to arrest her for interfering with an officer. 2 weeks later, Phoenix Reynolds, a 31-year-old divorced mother of two, found herself pulled over on a deserted stretch of County Road 8. Reeves accused her of weaving between lanes. Her dash cam mysteriously malfunctioned during the stop. When she mentioned her children waiting at home, Reeves suggested that Child Protective Services would be very interested in a mother driving erratically at night. Each victim fit a profile. Women between 20 and 35, usually alone, often vulnerable due to circumstances. Recent divorces, financial troubles, uncertain immigration status. Reeves kept meticulous notes on their routines, documenting when they worked, which routes they took, whether they had family nearby. His threats became more sophisticated. For Lucia Mendez, an undocumented house cleaner, he pulled up ICE deportation policies on his phone. When Bethany Wright, a recovering addict, protested her innocence, he mentioned how easily drugs could be found in her car. He learned to leverage each woman's specific fears against them. At the police department, his arrest records showed nothing unusual. Traffic stops were logged properly, though the number of verbal warnings he issued raised some eyebrows. Lieutenant Pascal noted the statistics in a quarterly review, but praised Reeves's discretion in not burdening locals with excessive tickets. Adelaide's departure in September barely registered in his consciousness. She left a note describing his controlling behavior, the surveillance cameras, his increasing detachment. He filed it away with his other records, another piece of paper documenting his activities. Their joint bank account continued to show unexplained cash deposits, what he called gratitude from his victims. Officer Luna Rosewood began noticing discrepancies in his reports. Times didn't match dispatch logs. Locations seemed randomly distributed rather than following typical traffic patterns. But each time she raised a concern, Reeves had a plausible explanation, backed by carefully doctored evidence. The victims developed their own survival network. Warning texts circulated among female bartenders and nurses working late shifts. Blue Dodge Charger patrol car. Take alternate routes. Some installed dash cams. Others changed jobs or moved away. A few gathered the courage to file anonymous complaints, but without willing witnesses, internal affairs couldn't build a case. In late October, Reeves made his first serious mistake. He stopped Margaret Chen, a criminal defense attorney, claiming she ran a stop sign. Chen recognized the pattern from other women's stories and secretly recorded the encounter on her phone. Though she managed to talk her way out of the situation, her recording would later become crucial evidence. His territory expanded beyond Springfield's borders into neighboring counties. He learned which jurisdictions shared information and which didn't. Some victims reported him to other police departments, but the complaints never reached Springfield. The predator's hunting ground grew larger, while his methods became more refined. Officer Luna Rosewood had spent 12 years developing what she called her cop sense, an instinct for when something wasn't quite right. By late October, that sense was screaming about Thaddeus Reeves. During quiet moments on dispatch, she began piecing together a disturbing puzzle. Working the night shift communications desk gave Rosewood access to all patrol activity logs. She started noticing patterns in Reeves's traffic stops that defied normal distribution. Between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., his stops were almost exclusively female drivers. The official records showed brief interactions, but the radio silence during these stops often stretched suspiciously long. At the local Women's Resource Center, Director Vivian Hayes was seeing her own pattern emerge. During Tuesday night support groups, women began sharing stories about a particular officer, never by name, always with the same modus operandi. Hayes started a private log, coding victim stories to protect their anonymity while documenting the similarities. The first anonymous tip came through the department's hotline on October 25th. A gas station attendant reported seeing a patrol car parked behind his station multiple times, always with a female driver's vehicle stopped in front. The second tip arrived 2 days later from a motel manager who'd witnessed similar scenes in his parking lot. Internal Affairs Detective Augustus Webb, who joined Springfield PD after 20 years with the FBI, approached the investigation like an intelligence operation. He created a detailed timeline, cross-referencing Reeves's patrol logs with surveillance footage from local businesses. The gaps were subtle, but consistent. Periods where Reeves's documented location didn't match available video evidence. Webb enlisted Rosewood's help, knowing her position in dispatch could provide crucial information without alerting Reeves. Together, they mapped every traffic stop against local crime patterns. The data showed Reeves patrolling areas with no history of traffic violations or criminal activity, but with high concentrations of late-night female drivers. The investigation had to move carefully. Webb knew that one wrong step would send Reeves underground, potentially destroying evidence and intimidating victims into silence. He coordinated with FBI Special Agent Winters, who specialized in police corruption cases, to build a bulletproof case. Local business owners began coming forward with more evidence. A convenience store's security camera had captured several of Reeves's undocumented stops. A truck driver reported seeing the officer apparently planting evidence in a woman's car during a late-night encounter. Meanwhile, Rosewood noticed changes in Reeves's behavior at the station. He began spending more time reviewing his own body cam footage, meticulously editing his reports. His interactions with female dispatchers grew more aggressive, while he became increasingly paranoid about being monitored. The breakthrough came when Margaret Chen, the attorney he'd stopped in October, contacted Webb directly. Her recording provided the first concrete evidence of Reeves's methodology: the fabricated violations, the escalating threats, the implicit demands. More importantly, it gave Webb probable cause for surveillance. The sting operation took shape over 3 intensive weeks of planning. FBI Special Agent Kira Winters, chosen for her background in undercover work and physical resemblance to Reeves's typical victims, would pose as the target. Every detail of her cover story was crafted to appeal to his predatory instincts. Recently divorced, new to the area, working late shifts as a hotel desk clerk. Webb's team equipped a silver Nissan Altima with concealed cameras and microphones. The car's registration and insurance were backdated through FBI channels to support Winters' cover story. They chose Route 27 near mile marker 43, a spot Reeves frequently patrolled with convenient access for tactical teams to hide. On November 15th, at 1:30 a.m., Winters positioned her car on the shoulder with a deliberately flattened tire. The temperature had dropped to near freezing, making her vulnerability more convincing. She wore a hotel uniform and kept her body language subtly defeated, another detail gleaned from victim statements. Reeves spotted the vehicle at 1:47 a.m. His patrol car's computer showed he ran the plates immediately. The registration query would appear normal to him, but it also silently alerted Webb's team that he'd taken the bait. 4 unmarked vehicles maintained discrete positions within a 1-mile radius. Officer Rosewood, monitoring dispatch, heard Reeves call in a motorist assist stop. His voice carried the same professional tone she'd heard countless times before, betraying nothing of his true intentions. She watched the GPS tracker on his patrol car as it pulled up behind Winters' vehicle. The operation almost derailed in its first minute. Reeves approached the car with more caution than usual, his instincts perhaps warning him something was off. He ran Winters' license twice, spending longer than normal reviewing the results. Later analysis would show he was checking for signs of a law enforcement record. But the carefully crafted backstory held up under his scrutiny. Winters played her role perfectly, showing just enough anxiety to seem genuine without overdoing it. She mentioned her new job, her recent divorce, her unfamiliarity with the area, hitting every trigger point they knew would interest him. Reeves followed his established pattern. First came the professional offer of help, then the subtle hints about finding something suspicious in her car. When Winters protested, he escalated to threats about impounding her vehicle and calling in a K9 unit. His body camera was switched off, another red flag in his routine. At precisely the moment Reeves suggested they could work something out, tactical teams moved in. The takedown was swift and clean. Reeves never had a chance to reach for his weapon. As Webb personally clasped the handcuffs around his wrists, the disgraced officer maintained his professional demeanor, as if this were all a misunderstanding. The evidence in his patrol car exceeded their worst expectations. A hidden compartment under the back seat contained a laptop with videos of previous victims, meticulously cataloged by date and location. His personal notebook listed license plates, addresses, and detailed information about dozens of women he'd targeted over the past 8 months. A search of his home revealed an even more disturbing collection. The basement contained a sophisticated surveillance setup, with monitors showing feeds from cameras he'd planted in various locations around town. Files on his computer documented hundreds of potential victims he'd been stalking, complete with photographs and daily routines. The trial of Thaddeus Reeves began on March 15, 2023, exactly 1 year after his first documented assault. The Springfield County Courthouse had never seen such intense media coverage. National news networks set up their equipment on the courthouse steps, while protesters carried signs demanding maximum sentencing. Inside Courtroom 3, 13 victims prepared to testify. Some had traveled from other states, drawn back to Springfield by the promise of justice. District Attorney Victoria Nolan had spent months building relationships with these women, earning their trust and preparing them for the difficult testimony ahead. Reeves sat at the defense table in a gray suit that seemed to swallow him whole. Gone was the confident swagger of his patrol days, replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger who barely acknowledged his public defender. His parents sat in the front row, his father's hardware store now closed after locals had boycotted it into bankruptcy. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 2 weeks. Each victim's testimony revealed new layers of Reeves's predatory behavior. Amara Delgado, speaking publicly for the first time, described how her encounter with Reeves had destroyed her sense of security. Phoenix Reynolds detailed how she developed severe anxiety, unable to drive at night without having panic attacks. FBI forensic experts presented devastating technical evidence. Despite Reeves's careful editing, they had recovered fragments of deleted dashcam footage. Cell phone tower data placed him at locations he'd never logged in his official reports. His patrol car's GPS tracking showed long stops in isolated areas that corresponded with victims' accounts. The defense strategy crumbled under the weight of evidence. Their attempt to portray the encounters as consensual fell apart when Margaret Chen played her recording. The attorney's clear voice filled the courtroom as it captured Reeves's escalating threats and demands. Several jurors visibly recoiled at the calculated malice in his tone. The trial's most dramatic moment came during Adelaide's testimony. She described how Reeves had installed cameras throughout their home without her knowledge, monitoring her movements and using the footage to control her behavior. Her voice broke as she detailed finding his detailed surveillance logs of other women. Two surprise witnesses emerged during the trial's second week. Former victims from Reeves's time in New Hampshire came forward, describing similar encounters from his earliest days in law enforcement. Though their cases fell outside the statute of limitations, their testimony established a pattern of behavior predating his Springfield crimes. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts, multiple charges of sexual assault, extortion, abuse of power, and evidence tampering. Judge Amani Richardson's courtroom fell silent as she prepared to deliver the sentence. Her words cut through the tension. Mr. Reeves, you have committed the ultimate betrayal of public trust. You used your badge not to protect and serve, but to terrorize and exploit. This court sentences you to 10 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole.